There is a moment that every camper knows and almost no one talks about honestly. The moment when the fire dies down to coals and the tree line goes from visible to implied, and the sounds of the forest, which were ambient and ignorable an hour ago, begin to arrange themselves into a pattern your nervous system was built to recognize. Not wind. Not animals settling. Something with intention moving through the dark just beyond the edge of what you can see. Most people roll over, pull the sleeping bag higher, tell themselves it was nothing and believe it by morning. These 5 people didn't get that option. A woman camping alone in the Ouachita National Forest woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of something pressing against the outer wall of her tent. Not an animal. She had camped alone enough times to know the difference between an animal investigating a campsite and something that was not investigating. Something that had already done its investigating and had arrived at a conclusion. The pressure moved slowly along the tent wall from the foot to the head, tracing the outline of where she was lying, tracking her through the nylon with a patience that she has described as the most frightening thing she has ever experienced. More frightening than if it had been loud. More frightening than if it had been fast. A group of 4 friends in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois woke on the second morning of their trip to find their campsite's perimeter marked. Not by an animal. The marking was methodical, deliberate, using objects from their own campsite arranged in a pattern that none of them had made and none of them could explain. Their gear had been handled while they slept. Nothing was missing. Everything had simply been moved. And the last one. A man camping in a designated site in a Washington state forest heard a voice outside his tent at 2:30 a.m. Not threatening. Not shouting. Speaking at a normal, calm, conversational volume, as if continuing a discussion that had been going for some time. The voice belonged to a woman. She was describing the inside of his tent, the arrangement of his gear, the color of his sleeping bag, what he was wearing. He did not open the tent. He has not camped alone since. 5 accounts from 5 people who went into the woods for ordinary reasons and came out with something they have not been able to leave behind. By the time we reach the last one, I think you'll understand why the dark outside a tent is different from every other kind of dark. It's the only dark that knows you're in there. The silence was the first thing that woke her, and Lisa understood immediately that this was wrong. She was 31, an experienced solo camper with 12 years of backcountry trips to her record. The Ouachita, the Ozarks, sections of the Appalachian Trail, one extended solo through the Olympic Peninsula that she still considered the best 3 weeks of her adult life. She was not a person who required company in the wilderness, and she was not a person who misread it. She knew the nighttime forest's vocabulary. The insect chorus that ran from dusk to the small hours. The occasional snap of something moving through the underbrush. The wind working through the canopy overhead in long, slow passes. The silence that woke her at 2:57 a.m. was the absence of all of it. She lay in her sleeping bag and she did not move. She opened her eyes in the total dark of a tent interior and she listened. The insect chorus was gone. Not diminished, gone as if something had interrupted the signal that kept it running. The wind had stopped. The canopy overhead was still. The forest around her campsite in the Ouachita National Forest had gone into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. She had camped enough nights in enough forest to know what produced this. She lay still and she listened and she waited. The pressure arrived at the foot of the tent 30 seconds later. Not impact, pressure. Something leaning against the tent's outer wall at the foot end, a gradual, deliberate application of weight that deformed the nylon inward 3 or 4 inches. Not pushing through. Not trying to enter. Pressing in. The way you press a hand against a surface to feel what's on the other side. Lisa did not move. She controlled her breathing with the concentration of someone who understands that remaining still is the only available strategic response. The pressure began to move, slowly, incrementally, tracking along the tent wall from the foot toward the side panel, a continuous slow movement that maintained its pressure without pause, without hesitation. She watched the nylon deform in the dim light that filtered through from the campsite's ambient moonlight through the canopy, barely enough to make the fabric surface visible, and she followed the deformation as it traveled. It was tracing her outline. Not approximately. The pressure moved along the length of the sleeping bag's foot section, up the side, pausing at the widest point of her hip. It was specific. It was tracking the shape of a body lying on its side in a sleeping bag, tracking it from the outside through the tent wall, with an accuracy that required knowledge of what was inside. Lisa's hand was on her knife. She had carried one on every solo trip for 12 years and had never removed it from its sheath for any reason other than camp tasks. Her hand was on it and she had not made the decision to put it there. The pressure reached the head of the tent. It paused. 4:45 seconds, she counted. It held its position at the head of the tent wall, directly adjacent to where her head was lying, with the patience of something that was not measuring time the way she was measuring it. Then it was gone. Not a retreat she could track. No sound of movement away from the campsite, no branch impact, no displacement of underbrush. The pressure simply ceased. The tent wall resumed its normal shape. The silence held for another 30 seconds, and then, as if something had released a switch, the insect chorus came back. All at once, full volume, exactly as it had been before. Lisa did not sleep again. She lay with her knife unsheathed beside her until the sky above the canopy began to lighten at 5:30 a.m. Then she emerged and walked the perimeter of her campsite. She found nothing. No prints. The ground was dry, the pine needle layer thick enough to retain no impressions. No disturbed vegetation. No evidence of any physical presence. She packed her camp in 40 minutes and hiked out. She has not camped alone since that trip. She camps with others now, always with others, and she does not explain why when people notice the change in her pattern. If they ask, she says she's gotten more social in her older age. She told me that what she cannot move past is not the feeling of being tracked through the tent wall, though that is what she leads with when she describes the night. What she cannot move past is the pause. The 45 seconds at the head of the tent. She has thought about it many times, and the thought that keeps returning is this: whatever was on the other side of that nylon in those 45 seconds was not deciding whether to enter. It already knew whether it was going to enter. It had known before it started. The 45 seconds were for something else. She has not found a name for what. The four of them had been camping the Shawnee National Forest every October for 6 years. Brendan, his wife Carla, their friends Dev and Michelle, and it had become the kind of annual ritual that accumulates a grammar of its own. Same campsite, same supply list, same sequence of activities, the comfortable repetition of people who know what they like and have stopped needing to improvise. The first day of the trip that October was exactly what 6 years of first days had been. They arrived in the early afternoon, established camp with the efficiency of long practice, had the fire going and dinner started by 5 p.m. The forest around their designated site was the Shawnee's characteristic mixed hardwood, oak and hickory going to their October colors, the undergrowth thinned by the season, visibility into the tree line better than it would be in summer. Clear. Familiar. They went to bed at 11 p.m. All four of them in 2 tents, side by side, the dying fire a few feet from the tent doors. Brendan woke at 6:15 a.m. He unzipped his tent, stepped out to start the coffee and stopped. The camp had been rearranged. Not dramatically, not overturned or ransacked. Rearranged with a precision that was, in its way, more disturbing than destruction would have been. The camp chairs, which had been in their usual positions around the fire ring, had been moved and placed in a circle facing outward, backs to the fire ring, seats facing the tree line in 4 cardinal directions. The camp table, which had been against the tree at the site's edge, had been moved to the center of the site. On it, the camp cooking implements had been arranged in a pattern, not random, not scattered. Arranged. The largest items to the outside, smaller items nested within, a concentric organization that had taken time and attention to produce. And around the perimeter of the campsite, at intervals of approximately 8 feet, forming a rough circle that enclosed both tents, the fire ring and the table, their personal items. Brendan's hiking boots, Carla's day pack, Dev's camp towel, Michelle's water bottle. Each item placed flat on the ground, equidistant from its neighbors, forming a perimeter ring of objects that had been collected from the immediate campsite area and redistributed around its edge. He woke the others. They stood in the early October morning and they looked at what had been done to their campsite while they slept 15 feet from it, and none of them spoke for a long time. Dev checked the perimeter items. His towel was where it had been hanging on the line between 2 trees, transferred to the ground and placed with its long axis tangential to the circle. Michelle's water bottle had been beside her tent door. It was now 60 feet away on the perimeter line. Nothing was missing. Everything was accounted for. Everything had simply been moved into a configuration that none of them had made. Carla, who was an elementary school teacher and who had a practical and organized mind, walked the perimeter and counted the items. 12 items. 12 positions evenly spaced. She looked at the spacing and said quietly that it was too even to have been approximate. That whoever had placed them had measured. The tent zippers had not been touched. They confirmed this. Both tents' exterior zippers were in the positions they had been left in the previous night. Nothing had entered either tent. Nothing had been removed from either tent's interior. Whatever had moved through their campsite at some point between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. had worked exclusively with what was already outside. They broke camp that morning and left. They have not been back to that site. They have not returned to the Shawnee in October. Brendan told me that in the 6 subsequent years since that trip, the 4 of them have not discussed it directly once. Not what they think it was, not what the arrangement meant, not what the perimeter circle of their personal items was intended to communicate. He said the closest they came to discussing it was 2 years afterward, at dinner, when Dev made a comment that landed in silence and was not followed up on. Dev had said, "It put our stuff on the outside. It put us in the center." He left the implication where he put it. No one picked it up. Some things announce themselves. Some things don't. The thing that announced itself to Patrick on a solo fishing trip in the Deschutes National Forest in Central Oregon announced itself in a way that he has spent 4 years trying to interpret. And the interpretation keeps changing, which he says is the worst part. Not knowing is a fixed state. Knowing changes every time you look at it. He was 45, a fishing guide who spent his professional life on rivers and his personal life, when possible, next to them. He had camped in the Deschutes dozens of times, not the developed campgrounds near the road-accessible sections, but the back reaches of the forest, the stretches of river that required a day's hike to access and that offered, in exchange for the effort, the particular silence of a place where the human footprint is genuinely light. He was in his tent at 10:30 p.m., reading by headlamp, when he heard the other camp. Not close, maybe 200 yards upstream through the trees, at a distance that carried sound clearly on a still night over open water. A camp with people in it, the sound of conversation and occasional laughter, the kind of ambient human sound that is, in a backcountry setting, simultaneously reassuring and intrusive. He was mildly irritated. He turned his headlamp off and went to sleep. He woke at 2:15 a.m. to the footsteps moving through the riverbank vegetation between the upstream camp and his site. More than one person. He could hear the multiple impact rhythms of a group moving through undergrowth, the sounds of people who were not particularly concerned about being quiet. He sat up in his sleeping bag and unzipped the tent door an inch and looked out. Nothing visible in the tree line. The river caught enough moonlight to be a faint silver presence in the dark. He could hear the footsteps, still moving, still approaching, still the sound of multiple people moving through vegetation, and he could see nothing producing them. He opened the tent door fully. He turned on his headlamp and swept the beam along the riverbank. Empty. Vegetation undisturbed. No people. The footstep sounds continued for 3 more seconds after his light came on and then stopped. He sat in the tent door with his light on for 5 minutes. Nothing. He went back to sleep. In the morning, he walked upstream to where he'd estimated the other camp to be. He found it at approximately the distance he'd guessed. A fire ring, some cleared ground, the signs of recent occupation. The ash in the ring was cold. The site had the quality of somewhere that had been used and abandoned in a hurry, not packed out properly, a few items left behind. A camp cup. A stuffed sack. The kind of items you leave when you leave quickly. He looked at the ground around the fire ring. The soft riverbank soil held impressions well. There were no footprints. There were boot impressions around the fire ring, normal camp traffic overlapping, the record of people moving in the immediate area of the fire. But between the fire ring and the downstream direction, the direction of Patrick's site, the ground held nothing. The vegetation beyond the cleared area showed no disturbance. He stood in that camp for a while. Whatever he had heard moving through 200 yards of riverbank vegetation in the dark had left no mark on the ground it traveled over. He has 3 explanations he cycles through. Sound traveling over water in unusual ways, producing the auditory impression of nearby movement from a more distant source. An animal, bears move through undergrowth with surprisingly human-sounding foot patterns. Acoustic pareidolia, the tendency of the listening brain to organize random sound into meaningful patterns, especially in a half-woken state. He cycles through these with the patience of someone who has been applying them for 4 years and has not yet found one that fully holds. The thing that none of them account for is the way the sound stopped when his headlamp came on. Not faded. Not continued past the moment of light. Stopped. In the same instant that the beam reached the riverbank, the footsteps ceased. He told me this is the part he keeps returning to. That the sounds responded to the light. That they knew when they had been seen. He still fishes the Deschutes. He still camps in the back sections. He does not leave his headlamp off for long. The circle of stones was not there when they set up camp, and by the time they found it, they had been inside it for 2 days without knowing. This is what makes Renata's account sit differently from the others. Not the encounter itself, though the encounter was disturbing enough, but the timeline of it. The understanding that whatever had arranged itself around their campsite had done so while they were present, and that they had spent 2 full days inside a perimeter they hadn't noticed. She was 28, camping with her boyfriend Aaron in the Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina. A long weekend trip, 3 nights, their first extended backpacking trip together. They had hiked in 5 miles on Friday afternoon, found a site near a stream, set up camp with the motivated competence of 2 people trying to impress each other with their outdoor capability. The site was good. Flat clearing, water access, established fire ring, the remains of previous camps visible in the cleared edges of the space. Standard backcountry site, nothing unusual. They were there for 2 days before Aaron, gathering firewood at the site's edge on Sunday afternoon, called out to her. The stones formed a circle approximately 40 feet in diameter, centered on their fire ring. Individual stones, each the size of a closed fist, placed at intervals of roughly 2 feet along a line that she could not see from inside it but that became immediately clear from the elevated ground at the site's edge where Aaron was standing. Round. Clean geometry. Evenly spaced. Each stone had been placed with its flattest face up. Each stone was slightly different from its neighbors in color and composition. Not gathered from one source but from the surrounding area, selected and assembled. The placement showed selection. It showed time. Renata walked the circumference. 40 feet approximately. 20 stones approximately. She crouched and examined the ground around each one. The soil disturbance from each placement was equivalent. The same degree of depression, the same displacement of leaf litter. They had not been placed at different times. They had been placed in a single session. Aaron checked their photos from Friday and Saturday. They had taken dozens, the campsite, the views, each other. He went through every image that included ground-level detail in the campsite's perimeter. No stones in any photo from Friday. No stones in any photo from Saturday morning. The circle had been placed between Saturday morning and Sunday afternoon, while they were in camp, while they were sleeping, cooking, sitting at the fire, while they were present in the space the circle now enclosed. They had not heard anything, had not seen anyone, had not, in 2 days of occupying a campsite with standard awareness, noticed a person walking a 40-foot circle around them, placing 20 stones in geometrically even intervals. They hiked out Sunday evening, 4 hours before they had planned to leave. Renata told me that the most frightening aspect of the account is not the circle itself, not the care of its construction, not even the understanding that it had been assembled around them without their awareness. It's that they had been inside it for some portion of an unknown period of time before they knew. She has thought about what a circle like that means. She has read about marking practices, territorial marking, ritual marking, the use of stone circles and folk traditions across cultures. She has not found anything that puts her at ease. What she keeps returning to is this: a perimeter that encloses something is doing one of two things. It is keeping something out, or it is keeping something in. She has not determined which function this one was serving. She's not sure she wants to. I want to tell you the last account carefully because what sits at its center is not movement or marks or sounds in the dark. It is language. Specific, knowledgeable, detailed language, delivered in a calm and conversational tone, by a voice that had no explanation for knowing what it knew. Nathan was 39 years old. A software engineer from Seattle, a regular weekend camper who used the forests east of the Cascades the way other people use gyms, as a place to discharge the accumulated weight of a workweek and return to something his body recognized as real. He was experienced, self-sufficient, and entirely comfortable alone in a tent. He had driven out to a campsite in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest on a Friday evening. A developed site, one of several in a loop, but it was late October and the shoulder season had cleared the loop of other campers. He was, as far as he could tell arriving in the dark, the only person in the campsite loop. He set up his tent, ate dinner, read for an hour, and was in his sleeping bag by 9:30 p.m. He woke at 2:28 a.m. He was immediately awake, not the gradual surface of normal waking, but the full, instantaneous alertness of someone whose threat recognition system has fired on something specific. He lay still in his sleeping bag and he listened. A woman's voice. Outside the tent, to his left, maybe 6 feet from the tent wall. Speaking at a normal, unhurried, conversational volume, as if continuing a discussion that had been in progress for some time. The tent is green, the voice said. Darker green on the rain fly. The sleeping bag is navy blue. Nathan did not move. His tent was dark green. His sleeping bag was navy blue. Both of these details were only visible from inside the tent or from very close outside it. The tent was staked on a natural platform above the road level, set back from the main loop track, not casually visible. "He's on his left side," the voice said. "His pack is at the foot of the tent on the right. His boots are outside to the left of the door." All accurate. Completely, precisely accurate. Nathan lay in his sleeping bag on his left side and he did not breathe more than he had to, and his mind was doing two things simultaneously: the rational cataloging of possible explanations. Another camper, a person on a phone call, someone whose location his ears were misreading, and the deeper, instinctual assessment of a body that had received information and processed it faster than his conscious reasoning could. His boots were outside. He heard this detail and understood it in the way that fear understands things. That whatever was speaking 6 feet from his tent wall knew where every element of his camp was positioned. Knew the interior. Knew the contents. Knew his posture in his sleeping bag. "He hasn't moved," the voice said. It was not alarmed. It was repertorial. Descriptive. As if providing an update to someone who was not present, or to no one, which was somehow worse. Nathan made the decision. He reached slowly for his phone, turned on its flashlight, unzipped the tent door in one fast motion, and put the light out into the campsite. The campsite was empty. The immediate area around the tent, the platform, the ground below it, the road beyond it, was fully visible in his phone light and held nothing. No person. No indication of a person having been present. The ground to the left of the tent, where the voice had originated, showed no compression in the frost-stiffened grass. No footprints. Nothing. He sat in the open tent door with his light on until 5:45 a.m., when the sky began to lighten. He did not sleep. He catalogued every explanation he had available to him and applied them methodically, with the logical discipline of an engineer. Sound from another campsite, carried and localized by atmospheric conditions. A person walking the road loop, heard at a distorted proximity. His own half-sleeping mind constructing narrative from ambient sound. He applied each one. None of them resolved against the content. The content was the obstacle. He could find explanations for a voice. He could find explanations for a voice that seemed close when it was far. He could find no explanation for a voice that correctly described the color of his sleeping bag, the position of his pack, the placement of his boots. Information that a person guessing would not guess correctly. Information that a person could only have if they had seen inside his tent. He drove home at first light. He has camped 4 times since, never alone, never in October, never in a site he cannot see from end to end before the light goes. He has told this account to 3 people. 2 of them offered the explanations he had already applied and discarded. The third, a woman he trusts who is not given to invention or dramatization, listened to the full account and then said, "The thing that bothers me about it isn't that it knew what was inside your tent." She paused. "It's that it was describing it out loud to something." Nathan has sat with this for 2 years. He has rotated it. He has looked at it from every angle available to him. He has not found the angle that makes it less disturbing than it is. The voice was not speaking to him. He was never addressed. He was described, catalogued, detailed, reported on, in the calm, informational tone of someone providing a status update. Someone making sure that something else, something that was listening, knew exactly what was in that tent. Knew the color of the sleeping bag. Knew which side he was lying on. Knew that he hadn't moved. 5 accounts. 5 people who went into the forest with ordinary intentions and came back with something ordinary could not contain. A presence that traced her outline through the nylon with 45 seconds of patience at her head. A campsite arranged into a configuration while 4 people slept through it. Footsteps that knew when they had been seen and stopped in the same instant the light found the riverbank. A circle of stones assembled inside a camp's perimeter without a sound, and the irreducible question of what a perimeter is for. And a voice in the dark describing the inside of a tent to something that needed to know. I keep returning to what that third person said. It was describing it out loud to something. The forest at night is not empty. It has never been empty. The dark beyond your tent wall has always held things that operated on their own schedules, by their own logic, with their own purposes that do not include explaining themselves to the person lying 6 feet away on the other side of the nylon. Most of the time, those things have no particular interest in you. Most of the time. The question worth sitting with, the one that will follow you on your next trip, in the last hour before sleep when the fire is down to coals and the tree line has gone dark and the forest sounds are doing what they do, is simple. When the sounds stop all at once the way they do before something arrives. What arrives? And when the silence holds for 45 seconds at the head of your tent, what is it deciding? If this unsettled you, you're not alone.